G'day and welcome to More Middle Conversations. This week I caught up with Philippe Guichard. He's an award-winning international industrial designer. He launched his successful products helped by his background in mechanical engineering. Look, Philippe's just a fascinating guy. He's founded his own design studios, D2 Design and Development in Melbourne. He's got this really strong passion and vision to change the way we think about products and design. And really, we talked a lot about topics around regenerative design, designing for long-term sustainability, and triple bottom line. He's very passionate about environmental sustainability. Philippe's all about making a positive difference in the world. I just loved chatting with Philippe. I'm sure you'll really enjoy it as well. So check it out and look forward to catching up with you again with more middle conversations. Enjoy this episode. Welcome, Philippe. It was great to get some time to speak to you today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to share some thoughts with you.
Look, the pleasure's all mine. I get to hear your buttery French accent for the conversation. It's much better than my boring voice.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, look, and now you're an industrial designer by trade,
Yes.
and also a fantastic speaker and storyteller. I've had the pleasure of hearing you a few times on video, and you're a lovely storyteller. Tell me about the transition or relationship between design and story, and where that sits for you in your mind.
It's actually a very interesting story just by itself. I was sitting exactly at that place a few years ago. And at that time, I pictured myself as a real introvert. So I was proud to be hiding as a designer for over 20 years, working with clients and doing things behind my computer and not, showing anything much. And at the time, I was looking for a designer I could follow that would talk about thoughtful design and the impact on design on environmental sustainability and social impact. Mm-hmm. And I've been to TED Talks, Wobby Talk, DLD, all those platforms, and spend a whole day looking at videos and trying to find someone, and I couldn't find anyone.
Right.
And I was sitting exactly at that place, and they were a sunny day like today, and suddenly the dark cloud arrived very abruptly. And I changed the light in my office here, and suddenly I saw my face in the monitor, the reflection of my face in the monitor. And I was like, yes, there is someone that could talk about that. And my first reaction was I was horrified, like really horrified. It's like, I'm not a public speaker. I've been hiding and I don't want to do that and everything. But after a few moments, I started considering, well, there's no one that talks about those values, and I'm really value driven. Mm-hmm. So if no one is talking about those values, maybe I should step up and do the work. Mm-hmm. And that's how I started the journey. So I started the journey by training, because I understood that if you're an expert in something, you suffer from the curse of knowledge, which means that your talk could be extremely boring for the audience because they could be too technical or, not enough, not really engaging. So I was really aware of that. So I spent quite some time training in order to share stories. And then when I was a bit more comfortable, I started to do keynotes and presentation. I did a TEDx also. And it's all about story and how we can make an impact by the choice we're making every day.
Yeah, look, it's a really wise way to go about it, and probably a designer's way to go about it. The consideration of audience and thinking about, the curse of knowledge. I read somewhere this morning, it was a fun little quote. It said, before the internet, we used to think that people were only dumb because they didn't have the information. And now we've got as much information as you could possibly need, and it hasn't sort of killed the curse of understanding, or not misunderstanding, I guess. The interesting thing, I guess, I want to touch on this career change, because it's something that happened to me. My role was management consulting similar, I guess, in terms of solving problems for people in large corporates. And the challenge I had with that, and it might be different for you, but the challenge I had was that it was a bit soulless for me. It was an experience of doing whatever the client needed. What was their problem? Work out a solution to their problem. But actually feeling like there was nothing meaningful in that for me. Tell me about your experience, I guess, in design. So obviously, I say someone needs a new chair, a new cable organizer for their desk. And I assume that at some point there's a challenge between, well, we need it to be this price point or this, we need to have this functionality, and you'll have your own values that'll want to influence that. And there's always going to be some trade-offs in that mix. Tell me about how you manage that.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting angle. And we can spend the whole day talking about that. But in a nutshell, what I understand after more than 25 years in industry is that you need to pay attention to first your mindset, and then the difference between the price that you have in terms of market positioning and the value proposition. So I'll start with the mindset. If you think that doing a sustainable product is expensive and you won't get a margin, then you're going to get an expensive product and you're not going to get the margin because you're going to think the old way and add something on top of that. But if you think, oh, I can have my cake and eat it too, and I can have a sustainable product and make a lot of money, then there's a paradigm shift in your mind, and then you explore options and things you haven't considered before. So I'll give you a very short case study around that, and then we'll go to the value proposition. But the case study, I designed an aquarium tank many years ago, and we used a cradle-to-cradle methodology in terms of environmental sustainability. And the profit margin were 4 times the profit margin of the rest of the aquarium range industry. We sold twice as much as we planned to, and the product didn't have any competitors in its niche for 14 years. It took 14 years for the competition to really find a way to enter the market, because we did some design strategy. Long story short, that was hard to penetrate that market. So you can have a sustainable product and you can make money. There's no dichotomy about that. The other angle is, if you focus on price all the time, then you're just driven by price, and the race at the bottom is you go out of business. That's the only end result for that strategy. So if you focus on something different, which is the value proposition, then you will discover that people are happy to pay a bit more or an equivalent price for a product that does something a bit better. And one of the things, and you're probably aware of that technique, it's people think innovation is very difficult and it's a big R&D, take and everything. And sometimes I disagree, because it could be extremely simple. It's about observing. So let's say I have a cup of tea with me here. If I want to improve on a cup of tea, instead of spending millions on a new material or a new technology for mass manufacturing something, I can just observe how people are using the cup of tea and discover that it's actually not working so well in terms of, mass or temperature or look and feel when you have the tea, or thermal capacity. The tea is too hot at the beginning and 5 minutes after it's too cold. So you can find pain points, and you don't need to spend a lot of time to find where the innovation is. And if you have a consistent pain point and a pattern there, then you have an innovation you can solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that's where my fascination with empathy is really important as a crossover, because often what we do is we get trapped in our own assumptions about what the problem is, or we get trapped in our assumptions about where the value might be. So, in my work with some teams, for example, particularly with leaders, there's often a question in their mind around, how do I motivate my team more? And they're so wedded to the fact that motivating my team requires a financial incentive, that there's nothing they can see to support their team that isn't money. And therefore it's a real challenge for them. And, some of the best leadership tips I've seen are leaders who write a handwritten note to someone, or go and say to one of their staff, hey, look, I know it's your kid's birthday. I know it's your son James's birthday this afternoon. Maybe you should take off a little bit early, because I'm sure you'd love to spend an extra couple of hours with him. That is worth so much more than it's $500 because you did a good job.
I've been studying habits also for quite some time, for the last 2-3 years, and there's this big difference between the intrinsic motivator and the out motivator. So if you're motivated by money, let's say you have a 50% raise, it's fantastic, and 6 months after, you're back where you used to be.
Yeah.
So if you have an intrinsic motivator, it's not related to money. It's related to autonomy sometimes, the way you do your work, the acknowledgement of what you've been doing, and the human relationship. So you're aware of that. And that could be just enough to thrive and be motivated to go to work.
Yeah. And a lot of that, Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist out of Duke University, writes fascinating work on this, and he's a great person to listen to. I'm interested in that in the sense that how do you as a designer really try and understand those intrinsic motivators? Often the extrinsic motivators are relatively straightforward. I need to cut something, so there's an object, I need it to be 2 objects, I need it to be cut in half. There's the tangible part of that, but I guess the intangible drivers for people are really important, and particularly in this space of sustainability and long-term thinking for design. I know you talk about the triple bottom line and how do we reduce environmental impact, but I'm also, I think people rationally get that, but there's also a huge movement for fast fashion, cheap clothing, cheap materials, disposables. So let's dive into some of this. What are the motivators that you see for people, so for consumers, and how do you consider those in your design and development process?
That's a very broad question again, but I'll try to answer. The way I see the current situation is that we have an old model, and I think that old model is kind of dying off. It's kind of the industrial revolution model, and I think as everything that is dying off, it's really fighting for its survival.
Yeah.
So the more it fights, the more it's going to come up with, like fast fashion and disposable stuff, and there will be probably more of that until it really comes to an end. So I'm not too focused on this. I know it's happening. I'm aware of it's happening. I'm more focused on building new. So building the new is actually, it's beyond products. So, and that's something I struggle a tiny bit sometimes when I speak or when I work with larger companies. They want the new product, but they want to keep the old business model.
Right.
And the paradigm is you need to change both. If you really want to succeed in the next economy, I suspect, you need to change both. So it's a matter of designing new products and a new business model. So, and there are experiments or companies doing that where sometimes you don't own your clothes. It's kind of a rental system of some form. Sometimes there is some kind of consignment, which means, I think there's a French company that does that with jeans. So you buy your jeans for 100 euros or something. You wear that, and after a year or two, when it's been worn out, you go back to the store and you have a credit of 20, 25 euros, and then you can buy the other jean, and they use the material to repurpose to make another jean later or something. So there's kind of a circular loop here happening, and for the customer, it's very good value proposition too.
Yeah.
So it's a mix of new product, new thinking, new business models, and new approach with the customer.
I think that's a really critical and probably overlooked point, which is the business model side. Because if you try and put that model into an existing company that has set margins and management structures and all those machines in place, it won't fit. And that so that takes more than a product, doesn't it? It takes a strategic shift.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And how do you, I guess, how do you, as a designer, have, you know, presumably sometimes you get brought in to say, fix this point solution, and you say, oh, I can, but the shift needs to happen more broadly. There's actually a strategic restructure that you'll need to do to make this work. How do you influence that, and how do you go about doing that?
So I see my role, or part of my role as a designer, as an educator too, and that's why I do keynotes now. The role is to say, it's really about that mindset shift. If you think that's not possible, then it's not going to happen. But if you open your mind to another possibility, then not only it will happen, but your company will not only survive, but probably thrive. I suspect a lot of big companies will fall in the next 5 to 10 years. So because they won't transition.
Yeah, right. So there's you know, the shift there is interesting because it takes a bit of courage in some ways. Now there's, you know, and I've been on this side of the fence and sort of say, look, you don't have any option. If you don't innovate, change, you will fail. And then we can roll out examples of Kodak, for example. Kodak invented digital photography, then hid it for 10 years. Nikon released it. Nikon are going fine. Kodak went broke. You pull that case study out, people sort of say, oh yeah, that's terrible, but that won't happen to us. And so there's a lot of, let's dive into what's going on in people there where they were trying to hold on to the old model, because I'm interested in how that plays into your process. What do you think is driving people wanting to hold on to what they've always had?
I think there's a number of layers. First, we are creatures of habit. Like you, me, the next CEO, we are creatures of habits. So if you've been working in an environment where everything's been fine for the last 10 or 15 years or 20 or 30, you don't see why that should change. And you don't have that finger on the pulse of the startups and the new things happening, and you think it's not really relevant and most of them fail, so why bother? And so you don't feel threatened by any bit. But history just proved that, you know, all those new companies and new way of thinking have a compound effect. And when the line crossed, then suddenly you're pretty much out of business, and then it's way, way too late. So when I talk about innovation with medium or large companies, it's about taking the risk and experimenting now. And it doesn't have to cost millions and everything. It's just, okay, can we experiment something? Can we see if we can test a product and a new business model? And just in a tiny segment of one of our branches, nothing, you don't revolutionize everything. You just try and test and understand the market, the feedback, and what you learn from that. And then you keep iterating and testing. There's a culture, so people talk about failure. I'm really uncomfortable with that term. It's like, when you have your kid that start walking, they try to walk and then they fall, and then they try and then they are very, sometimes you even wonder how they stand up, because it doesn't look right. And you wouldn't call that failure. It's the way you learn. It's the way you experiment. It's the way you get feedback from the environment. And I think maybe when the companies are too comfortable, they forget that they should do that. They should start to walk again.
Yeah.
Take baby steps and try stuff and get the feedback and then try again. Innovation doesn't happen, it's a process. Like, people really forget about that. It's a process of failing all the time, and then after all that learning curve, you do succeed.
for me, it feels like there's a point in our lives, and I know there's some scientific research into the neuroscience and how your brain develops in this space, that we do hit a point in our lives where we go from everything being open, curious, interesting, my little daughter, to she'll chuck batteries in her mouth, she'll try, eat dog biscuits, no problem. There seems to be a point, and there's a debate about this around sort of teenage years, later teenage years, that we start to turn that off. The way I often talk about it is, a 15 or 16-year-old, they feel like they already know everything they need to know. And if you ask them, they'll tell you they already know everything they need to know. And, there's this sense that the brain doesn't want to take on too much more uncertainty at that point. Tell me about techniques you can use to help unlock that, help people to be more curious and stop that almost natural instinct to follow routine and habit.
I think one of the approaches is just to share case studies. Like if you work with any industries and any CEO, they are very pragmatic. They want to show me the numbers, and I very often start with this. Like I have case studies. Like if I go back to the aquarium tank, the story is a bit different than like the official people, what people remember from it. They remember that it was a success, that it made a lot of money and everything. The story is that it took 18 months of work to get there. And we did quite a few prototypes, and the product that is on the market is not the product we started with. We started with a different vision, different strategy, and we failed. And then the marketing didn't agree with one of the proposals. And when they did agree, the finance department did not agree with the business model. And so there were a lot of obstacles and learning and everything. And then suddenly, the product appeared and was a success. So you need to really you need to educate and make people understand that it is a process. And in that process, you're going to have the high and the lows. You're going to face the dip in a design process. It's a classic. It's a phase where you think you have an idea, you get excited, and suddenly you realize it's not working. And pretty much all products have that. And then you need to ramp up and find, so it takes effort, it takes commitment, it takes vision and everything. One of my favorite tools is to also talk about the compound effect. You have that in meditation. You meditate 5 or 10 minutes a day. Are you a different person now than you were, yesterday? Not by much. After 10 minutes of meditation, not much. But if you do that consistently for, a year, 10 years, 20 years, after 20 years, you're a whole complete different person. You don't react the way you used to react. So I really believe in the compound effect. And the difficulty of the compound effect is that if you look at the curve, it's very flat at the beginning. It's flat, it's boring, it's laborious and everything. But then when you start to pick up, it does really pick up very, very nicely. So it's a mix of case studies and some principles like the compound effect. And then if you combine them together and have this open mind of, trying new things, experimenting, learning, then you're on your way to success. I mean, there's no other possible option.
So that's interesting. There's 2 challenges I can sort of see straight away. One is that maybe not most, a lot of organizations want instant step change.
Yes.
They want, we want instant performance, instant results. When I work with leadership teams, that's one of the questions, like what's the outcome going to be? We're going to do 6 sessions. We're going to do monthly, team coaching sessions, whatever the program might be. What's it going to look like after 1 month? And you're right, the answer is pretty much exactly what it looks like now, but we'll have taken that step. And so there's the challenge, 2 challenges here that I want to talk about. One is that demand for a step change quickly. The second is when I look at an organization that's put in the hard work, they're actually at a point that I want to get to, but I don't want to do all the work. And, they're doing things, they've changed their business model, they've changed the way they think. So they're able to do things that I want to be able to do. And so there's this real sort of gap that's opened up between organizations. And how do you, first of all, deal with the instant step change challenge? They want the results today. And how do you tell that story of, well, actually, you can't do what this organization is doing right now? Like, it's just not going to happen, but there's a process we can go through. How do you have that conversation with clients?
Again, it's going through case studies. And it's the same for my vision of design for the triple bottom line. It's proving with case studies that you can have a good product, you can have a product that is beneficial for the environment, you can have a product that has a positive social impact. And then I would say, like, you mentioned cable stuff, this small cable management device. There were 32 prototypes.
Wow.
Like, you cannot think of that product when people look at that, it's I could have done that myself. It's so simple. And it is.
Yeah.
But until, it took about 8 months until month 5 or 6, something, there were about 6 parts. There was too complex. The business model was not working. So it is a process. My trust is in the process. If you keep at it, if you're consistent, if you're committed, you're going to get through it. If you start finger pointing, creating tension because you don't want to, it's like going to the gym. Let's say you're slightly overweight, you're like 100 kilo, 110, and you hire a gym coach and say, okay, I need a program and I want to weigh 80 kilos in a week. The guy is going to look at you, it's like, you're out of your mind. You're going to hurt yourself. It's possible, but you're going to damage your body long term. It doesn't make any sense. How about we work on a program and you lose 500 grams every 2 weeks, or and then in a year from now, you're going to feel fantastic. You're going to have good habits and you're going to be in shape for much, much longer. So the short-term thing for me, it's, I don't, when I'm asked for short-term solutions, I usually just can't. It's not, unless I have an idea on the spot and I can deliver. Otherwise, I just know it is a process, and it is a process with the team. Like, everyone has to be aligned, has to understand the challenges, and has to commit to the long-term action and effort.
Yeah, I think and this is where I think it's fascinating, because really quickly, industrial design, product design, anything moves from being just about what's the tangible products, what are the numbers, what does the spreadsheet look like, into actually what does it mean for people? What does it mean for the mindsets, for the way people view things, the models they consider in the world, things like ownership, things like, what does a sale look like? What does a long-term relationship between business and customer look like? It starts to we start to have to transform not just what we do, but the way, not just what we do and how we do it, but the way in which we think about who we are and what it means to be an organization, which I guess is, one of the things that I've heard you speak about is this idea of regenerative design.
Yeah.
We currently make heaps of stuff. Most of that stuff is used for a very short period of time and disposed of. And I think you might have said we've created additional continents made of plastic floating around the ocean.
Yes.
Now, we all know that's the problem. That's a really big issue. And obviously one of the ideas is, how do we make less stuff and consume less stuff, which humans are notoriously bad at doing. We love stuff, and consumption is one of our best, seemingly one of our best traits. Tell me about regenerative design and how there's a difference here and what that looks like.
Yeah, for quite some time, I've been working with, that idea of sustainability and everything. And the whole idea is that you just balance out or try to balance out the input and the output. So if you're making a product, then you try to be mindful of the impact of the product on the environment, the energy that is used, and all that. But if you look at the world today, I think we've passed that point where you need to break even. I think we need to design models and systems and companies where the output is actually beneficial for the environment, and I also would say for in terms of social impact. So it's kind of a very new paradigm. So what I had in mind is the current model we have is more or less linear. So you extract the ground, the matter and everything. You transform into a product that is more or less disposable. You have a shelf life, so to speak, program obsolescence, all that type of stuff. And then you dispose that and it's waste and it goes in a landfill or something like this, or in the ocean, which is worse. So we need to completely shift that paradigm to something that we probably need to grow. There are, bacteria and other plants and algae that we can grow and make plastic from and everything. So that there's a whole promising area there. Then we need to have products that are a bit more long-lasting, that can be maintained, repaired, repurposed. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, you don't have waste, you have raw material. You have a material that can be used again for another purpose, and it could be to enrich the ground. And, so currently I'm working with a startup, we're designing a product that is compostable. Mm-hmm. It's made with a bioplastic, and the product itself will go in the ground and decompose after a couple of years or something, and you need to replay that product and everything. But it's part of the game, I would say. It's part of the new paradigm, and we try to make that fun and exciting. So we're hopeful that we're going to hit the target, but we need to really change that paradigm. So I think we need to build or start thinking of building companies that will benefit the planet and the people more, in order not to break even, but to reverse the trend that we are in.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. I think sometimes we get into this, we sort of take these two sides or two perspectives. One is capitalism, growth, economic strength is important, and therefore that's the priority. The other end is actually sustainability, not using as much, caring for the planet is more important. And we think these two sides, these are two sides that are fighting, and there's no middle ground. And I think your point is actually, it's a third spot up here, which is doing both effectively. Not an or, it's an and problem.
Yeah. And on one of my topics that I share sometimes is to urgently redefine the GDP, because we're all chasing the wrong metrics.
Yeah.
And that's a very big issue, and it goes down to the corporation you work with, and they need quarterly results, and in order to deliver that, they kind of put too much money in R&D and innovation, and it's all driven by that kind of GDP target that we need to focus on. So I think if you look at the big system, we need to really redefine the GDP, and the world, different world countries should really work on that. And I don't really see that happening yet. But I think it's a major issue, because even if you try to play that old game with new paradigm, it still creates a lot of tensions.
Yeah, it does.
So we need to create a completely new paradigm.
Yeah, and look, I think that's one of there's a whole lot of issues that we face in this sort of space of that paradigm shift, because one of the challenges is if everyone moves at the same time, it might be fine. It's a bit like the idea of autonomous vehicles. If tomorrow we could make all vehicles autonomous and connected through a network, the roads would be incredibly safe.
Yes.
If we have half of them autonomous and half not, it might be worse than it is now. There's argument about that. It probably won't be, but you can't harness all the benefits of it being fully autonomous. There's this dangerous middle place, and I think it's similar with some business models. There's organizations that say, well, the way we're going to play the game is using only these types of materials, never using these pesticides. We're only going to play in this certain way, and therefore the price is going to be a little bit higher potentially. But they are then competing with people who are breaking those rules and saying all the right things. We don't use chemicals, we don't do this, and actually they do. And because of that moral or unethical behaviour, they've then got an advantage. That's a bit of a challenge, isn't it?
It is. I've been reading different books on economics and everything recently, and I think the worst concept that's been invented, so to speak, in economics is the idea of externalities.
Yep.
And that's something that I find mind-blowing. Like, and even company that try to do good or something, they play by those rules of externalities. And I'll give you an example. If you buy a Tesla, you think you're green because it's an electric car and everything. And don't get me, they are great cars and there are a lot of good things about them.
Yes.
But they need rare earth, and most of them are extracted like in Mongolia. And if you look at the damage, the ecological damage in Mongolia, they have lakes of pollutants, chemical stuff that's been used that have been dumped in nature, and we have no idea how to deal with this.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not such a green car when you look at the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of externalities for the brand Tesla. It's like, it's not my problem, it's an externalities of, and that should not exist, like, really. And if we had a way of including the financial model of externalities within every business, I can tell you that businesses will change very, very quickly if they had to pay for the externalities.
Yeah.
That will change super quickly.
That's a really important point. Humans naturally have exploited each other, or found points for exploitation for forever. I would assume, whether it be exploiting each other or power and control. I think someone said to me once, you look at technology, one of the biggest things was that Europeans got boats and guns and the rest of the world didn't have them, and therefore there was this sort of almost instantaneous colonization across massive amounts of land, and that was a technology step in many ways. We don't think of it that way, but it was a technology problem. But that sort of leads me to an interesting question for you around long-term thinking and being a designer. I think it was when Oppenheimer saw the first test of the nuclear bomb. He said some quote, "I have become death." It's a quote from an ancient text that he apparently said, because I think he was suddenly terrified and realized the implications of what he's invented. You work on this design and this technology, this innovation, and sometimes you don't think about either the externalities. I'm sure the people at Tesla weren't going, excellent, we're going to create all this horrible waste in Mongolia, that's our mission. But it is very difficult to consider all those things, either the immediate externalities and challenges, but also what are the long-term potential impacts. How do you play with that? How do you think about these things?
I think one of the best way is to start talking about it. Because for a lot of companies and founders and engineers and everything, they are so focused on their task, they don't see anything that's happening before and after.
Yeah.
So if you start mentioning that, then they realize, oh yeah, they are, the raw material has been extracted this way, and that's creating pollution. And because of the mere fact that we getting that material, we're contributing to that. So I think it's all start with awareness. I'm just hoping that with enough awareness, there's the tipping point, and then suddenly, maybe to go back to the Tesla example, Tesla will hire 20 chemical engineers and to find a better way to dig rare earth or find something completely different, so that they can solve those battery issues and the impact they have. So I think if you don't have the awareness, there's nothing you can do. It just doesn't work. So the best way is to start the conversation, start talking about it, and then there is this very big question of how big the ecosystem you want to play with. Because everything we do has an impact. We're all interconnected. There's this kind of a one planet with all those beings. So everything we do, you and I today, has an impact somewhere. And because, the clothes you wear, the food you have, the choices you make, all that, the energy you use, all that has an impact. So it's a matter of defining, okay, which ecosystem are we going to play with? And we need to start somewhere, and we need sometimes to start small, so to speak, and start with the suppliers and like companies like, I think that's Patagonia, they help their suppliers and also their secondary suppliers, so the supplier of the supplier, which is very unique. So they've been extending the ecosystem, and there's nothing that legally force them to do so. It's just a wheel of understanding where everything comes from and how they can have a better impact on the whole chain.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I've heard a lot about Patagonia. They do a lot of really interesting sort of things in that space. The question, though, is how do we... Patagonia are able to do that in part because they're a privately owned company. They don't have a share market demanding of them. Now, I'm sure they're very profitable, but they don't have a share market demanding of them ongoing growth. And that's sort of the elephant in the room, I think, in terms of some of this long-term sustainable development. Example from my career working with banks, many of the banks would sign up to say we won't lend money to, say, big tobacco. We won't lend money to organisations that have unethical operations. There's obviously a simple grey area in the middle, which is, what about brown coal mining? What about some of those sorts of things? And there's legal and ethical, and these are different lines, and it's grey in between. But there's also some really clear things that they may lend. They may say, we're not going to fund the development of weapons, for example. We're not going to lend money to a company X because they create landmines. We know they're going to use it to create landmines. But they will give a facility loan, a large loan, to an organisation like Boeing or something large, and they may have a division which creates, landmines and cluster munitions. But now the ethical challenge here is that's a very profitable loan to be giving out. There's huge amounts of money to be made out of those. Unfortunately, due to war, there's a huge amount of money to be made here. Is it their responsibility as an organisation to be incredibly diligent not to do that, or to make sure they're capitalising on the profit there because that's what their shareholders demand of them in the market? Now, I know this is sort of outside of design a little bit, but
it is. But it's very interesting. I love those conversations. My answer is that I think we need more visionary leaders.
Yeah.
Like leaders that say, okay, this is it. This is the line of sound, and we're not going to cross that. And a lot of people would say, hey, it's not possible because of this or that. And you look at the fact, there are companies that have very strong leaders, and they are able to change things. There's a company in Europe called Danone. They do yogurts and whole kind of things. They decided to become a B Corp. And they are very aware of their environmental and social impact, and they want to work on it. Do they have everything perfect? I don't think so.
No.
But they have this commitment. And so you need to have a leader that say, okay, this is the line in the sand, and we're not going to cross this, and we're going to do our best in order to achieve that. Yes. Will it be a process? Yes. Will it take efforts and take time? Definitely. But I think that's the companies of the future. There's a whole shift in consciousness too. If you look what the new generations are buying and the way they consume and the way they invest and everything, it's quite different. And so I'm really focused on trying to shift that paradigm and address the new form of consciousness and have product and services that are focused on them, versus trying to play the old game and everything and continue in that paradigm. I think old industrial revolution paradigm is dying, and we need to build and focus on the new.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And, that's my focus is on how we build leaders who can connect, understand, build trust, commitment in their people, in their customers, in shareholders, in markets. I think it does come back to leadership. That's, you mentioned earlier around positioning, and there's a level of something I want to sort of tie back here. How do you communicate well in this space? You're a self-confessed introvert behind the computer, designing, now taking to stages of TEDx and presenting your keynotes. And I encourage people to watch your TEDx. It's a fascinating session. I really enjoyed it. How do you develop that sense of communication so that these leaders can bring people on the journey?
I worked in different environments, from startups to medium and small company and larger companies.
Yeah.
And you can sense when you've been told a story that is just for the sake of telling a story, because they have an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want you to understand the agenda, but they want to play a kind of official story and everything. And people sense that very quickly.
Yeah.
I think in Australia, they call that a BS detector. And I think if you have a genuine story, a genuine set of values you want to share, then you build a community that will support you.
Yeah.
And how big is the community? It really depends on how long you've been playing the game for and everything. But if you look again at brands like Patagonia, I'm not sure they're going to go out of business anytime soon. They have such a strong community and followers and people that are really willing to back up the company because of the values they stand for.
Mm.
So in order to achieve that, I think storytelling, as you're a speaker, you exactly know what I mean here. Storytelling is probably one of the most powerful tools you can use if used well. So I think people understand that if you use storytelling with a good intention, it's very likely that you can build a community that can help and support you and help you on the journey.
Yeah.
I think that's my, that would be my answer on this one. It's about storytelling. It's about also being authentic, being genuine, and not trying to have an agenda. Yeah. People sense when people have an agenda.
Yeah, they do. And I think it comes back to something you've mentioned a number of times now, which is what are your values? What do you believe in? What are you going to have the convictions to stand behind and say, this is too important for us not to do something? And then how do you create, and Patagonia is a good example of this. I think there's many. How do you create a community around you where you've clustered these people who believe what you believe, and you're then authentic and vulnerable to those people to say, these are the decisions we're going to make. These are the principles by which we live by. This is a topic that's really I'm passionate about, which is that so many businesses focus on what are the policies and what are the structures and rules and what's legal, what's within those bounds, rather than, sure, it's legal, but it's not right. It's not the right.
Exactly. Yeah. I think just staying in the frame of legal today that doesn't make much sense. You need to stand in a frame of value and ethics that you've built for yourself, for your company. And if you stand strong and communicate on those ones, then there is absolutely no reasons that you have a very good business. Patagonia has a very profitable business.
They do.
I mean, really, they are really fine. Like it's not like they're struggling because they try to be a bit green or anything. No, they have a very sound business and they try to do good. So again, it's a mindset thing. If you don't think it's possible, it's not possible. If you think it's possible, you find a way and you make that happen.
That's a really great point. Look, I want to ask you, who are the sort of organizations or either companies or products that sort of excite you and that you're following because they
Ah,
maybe
okay. That's
one of them, but
yeah.
what are some others people want to check out?
I think I'm not sure I really focus on one company in particular. I'm just mindful of the whole shift that is happening. So I'm trying to follow what's happening with conscious capitalism and B Corp, and trying to see what those guys are doing, so, and I'm also trying to help a number of companies. There are a couple of startups I'm working with. I enjoy working with startups because they have a kind of an open book. So there's a lot of things you can do for a startup that it's harder to do for larger companies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we manage that well, there are a couple of those startups that will be very decent sized company in the future. So for me, they represent the hope and the shift that we need to make. And then the other thing that I had in mind when I work with startups and they want to implement the change, I really see that as a kind of a case study for the future.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of what I've been doing for the last few years is really to try my best to educate, but also prove that it can be a sound business. You can make money. You can, employ people, respect, people and your suppliers, maybe even benefit the environment and all that, and prove that. And so when next time I have a conversation with the CEO of a company that say it's not possible, you just say, yes, it is. Yep. That's how it works.
Yeah.
So that's the game.
Yeah, that's awesome. And look, I think it gives me great hope to speak to people like you, Philippe, because there's people who are, there's people who are innovating. We're stepping forward for the solutions rather than hoping to regress somewhere, trying to go backwards. I think this whole, get back to where we were mentality that some people have is it's fighting against the arrow of time, if you like. There's only one way to go. It's forward, and it's going to be beautiful and thoughtful design, value-laden design from people like yourself who are going to lead us there. And I think you should probably acknowledge yourself as a leader that you spoke about, that we need one of those leaders who's starting to take us forward.
Well, thank you for that. I have to say, I get really excited by that potential that we have to build something fresh, good, new, and that can benefit pretty much everyone.
Yeah, me too.
I find that really exciting. So I'm glad that I can be just some small part of that.
No, I think you're playing a big role, and it's great to have you in our communities and helping organisations, particularly their startups. Philippe Guichard, has been an absolutely Guirchard. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Guirchard, still good.
Guirchard, Philippe Guichard, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you today. Really appreciate your time, and look forward to catching up with you in person when we're in the same city next. Hopefully,
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your time and your incisive questions this morning. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.